Right, this video's called Class Politics and Authenticity. And I've noticed the older I've got that not only is there an authenticity, a lot of it in politics, which has grown and grown and grown and grown throughout my lifetime, but it's also, it gets in your own head and you sort of like conflate pop culture or something like that, and entertainment and vibe with politics. And I've noticed that working class politics gets you away from all of that. It's sort of like you understand the difference when you focus on that. Where if you just focus on the news and all that, then you get into all the bollocks, all the crap, all the superficial stuff, which is more like vibe. And there's a place for personality and vibe in life, but it's not in politics. It's in pop music and things like that. I like the cause, right? That's like an image thing. Like, that's where it belongs. That sort of thing. Or on TV, sitcoms and dramas and movies, but it doesn't belong in politics. And it's part of the propaganda matrix, and it's very, very, very subtle. But it's very manipulative when you combine it with all the other manipulative stuff, the more obvious divide and rule stuff. Now, by divide and rule, I don't just mean the right-wing press when they do divide and rule stuff to split the working class. State superstructure is already a divide and rule thing, splitting the working class in a different way on economics. I just read something, but I could have quoted it. It's from the New York Times. Someone's blurting it out, saying about how we've managed to get rid of so many of the people who want opportunity to get up the ladder, and how we're just like now the elite colleges and unis in America that are dominating the news media. That's the liberal metropolitan elite showing off openly in the public, in the newspaper, which should be read by the public. And I'm thinking, like, why are they saying that? There was a similar thing in the UK last week about divide and rule on the front page of a Tory newspaper. And I think that's a one-off. I'm blatantly admitting it. Although it was the Times, and they might say they were actually criticising it because they're more like centrist. So I'm not sure about that one. But the American one was bewildering. You just don't show off about that. It even said in the comment piece in the New York Times, from this one person was writing it, it wasn't the New York Times editorial comment, it was an individual. But he even said we got rid of the working class from the elite. As the liberal metropolitan elite dominate in the US, but they don't usually admit it. It's like if you're a crook, you don't usually admit it. But there you go. Sometimes it comes out in the open, and I wish it did all the time, because then it wouldn't last 2 minutes. Now, like I said, the authenticity gets away from all that anyway. So, for example, my position on opportunity, equality, merit, and all that is that you get more working class into university, and that is the opportunity. That is the way to do that. So when the right say, "Oh, UBI and all this, it'll stop people working," I'm always thinking, just won't. Not if you encourage aspiration through getting more working class into education, but they won't do that. I don't really think they're being authentic. And this video is about authenticity. So, you see, the myth about people won't want to work if you bring in UBI was also said decades ago about if you give people social security, they won't want to work. But the truth of the matter is that before we had social security, people were unable to work because they were not intelligent enough to work, because they didn't have the opportunity to become at all educated. So it's just all a load of bollocks to maintain the existing massive inequality. And it deserves to be completely ignored. There's a quote by Curtin Johnston and Noam Chomsky. The Chomsky quote is, "The smart way to keep people passive and obedient is to strictly limit the spectrum of acceptable opinion, but allow very lively debate within that spectrum, even encourage the more critical and dissident views. That gives people a sense that there's free thinking going on, while all the time the presuppositions of the system are being reinforced by the limits put on the range of the debate." It means they don't have free speech, it's just they're being propagandized, and then they're just saying what they've been told to say. And there's a little bit of variation within what they can say. Caitlin Johnston words it in her own words, "People are continually herded by propaganda into a tightly constricted mainstream worldview where bought and owned elected officials pass the baton back and forth based on how people are feeling about artificial wedge issues which don't affect the powerful. This is by design." Now that's classic Labour, Tory, Democrat, Republican. The system is fixed forever by the top, the elite, the top, but it makes it look like it's not. And it's just that very tightly this an inch of difference in opinion. But that doesn't mean to say that the Tories are necessarily to the right of Labour or Labour necessarily to the left of Tories. It can easily switch around, and it's just musical chairs basically. Anyway, this is about authenticity, not all that crap. So I won't get away from that. I've been through all that a million times. So it's what it all gets away from, I think, is the issue of money. Because if they want to maintain this massive power inequality, they don't want the working class to focus on money at all, because if they do, then that would be a radical difference, and it would be free speech, and it would be change. And if you notice, if you don't propagandize the working class, then the focus is on bread, basically, on money. And the personality stuff, and all the vibe stuff, and all the image stuff, and all the propaganda just gets no mention, because that can only influence the working class if it's done by design. It can only be interesting to the working class if it's propagandized to them, if it's pushed onto them. If there's no propaganda, the feeling about needing more money would still be there, but all this circus wouldn't be there. And in the last 7 years, it's the biggest circus I've ever seen in politics. It's absolutely huge, and it's vibe, it's personality, it's controversy for entertainment reasons. There's individual figures trying to be deliberately provocative, not because they've got real views, but because they want to make a name for themselves. So what's the way to do that? You can be unpopular and still attract a lot of views on the news and stuff. For example, Piers Morgan's vastly unpopular, but I admit that if he was on TV, it would attract viewers and viewers and viewers to him, not because he's popular. You can check it out. He's unpopular, very unpopular, but that attracts people to watch what he's got to say. And he's not really genuine. For example, he'll present an image of being right-wing. When you check out his views, he's pro-NHS, he's open-minded UBI, he votes Democrat, he's a Remainer, he's a Liberal, and yet he'll stand next to the right-wingers as if and I'm thinking, what's the connection? And when you see the right realise who he really is, they absolutely despise him because they feel like they've been fooled. He's against guns as well. So when you look at him, he could be a Green voter, or if he got too radical for the Democrats, and he's anti-gun, he's pro-NHS, he's pro-welfare state. And when he says, when he responds to people accusing him of being in with the right, he always says, "Well, I don't vote that way, and I was a Daily Mirror editor, and he was in charge of the Daily Mirror for a reason, because he's on the left." So this sort of guy, right, portrays himself as on the right while never lying, because he never actually says that he is. So you know what I mean? He's like fooling you. He never actually says, "Oh, I'm a Brexiteer. I believe in factionism or anything." He tells the truth, but he gives an impression of difference, and that is inauthentic, very inauthentic. And yet he always gets round it because he says, "Well, look at me here. I'm going on about how pro NHS I am, how I voted Remain, how I argued against these gun people, how I'm for the welfare state, how I work for a Dairy Miller." So you can't ever beat him in the argument, even though you know that he's presented this image of being totally different, of being some kind of on the right or something. He's very strange, that guy. Because he's the only person I've ever known who's gone so far in presenting an image that's not who he is at all. I mean, literally, complete opposite. Just think about a hypothetical person now who is totally committed to the left and is with a Daily Mirror. And then imagine the guy present himself differently while never changing his views. That's what Piers Morgan does. But he gets found out. He gets found out by Brexiteers. He gets found out by Republicans. He gets found out by so he's just weird. So weird. Because it ends up with no one liking him because anyway, that is the kind of inauthenticity we're against. It should be. Like, say I'm for this working class authenticity, I would not have Piers Morgan as our poster just because he really is on our side ultimately. Then don't spin yourself differently then. So no, he's gone. He's out. If the right have rejected him, I mean, and the hostility he gets from Brexiteers online is through the bloody roof. Because they were fooled as well. And fooled in a weird way because Piers Morgan always answers back, "No, those are Remainer." What used to do is thinking that they're the fools. But I understand what they mean. He presented himself differently with always having plausible deniability. You think he was doing a UFO cover-up thing, the way he spins it, so you're all confused. So getting away from all that crap. You see, you wouldn't get someone whose working class roots sticks to their principles and all that, doing this spin show. It's just totally and utterly foreign. The only reason why anyone would do that is for TV ratings. The only reason for newspaper sales, for profit, for money, for this continuous power thing, status thing. No one would do it out of any kind of authenticity. Who you are is how you would look. And occasionally, Piers Morgan admits what he's doing. Like he'll say something like, "I am not presenting myself to the real." He occasionally admits it, but it's like a needle in a haystack. So either 4,000 days, he wouldn't admit it. So I got back to what I was saying at the start with the New York Times confession. Well, an individual in New York Times and the UK Times newspaper, where Divide and Rule headline of the week. Just occasionally there's confessions. I don't think of 3 off the top of my head there, though, which is bad, is it? Considering some people say they never confess, ever. That's not quite true. The needle in a haystack confessions. Now, given I think the state superstructure involves the Democrats and Labour as well, and I haven't really denied that, have I, in this? But what is the classic example of their propaganda that is not... Remember, the propaganda isn't just for themselves, it's for the state superstructure as a whole. What role do they play? My claim is that in the UK, it's best seen... in the US, it's the liberal metropolitan elite has the edge on the Republicans, I think, in the sense of who gives out the propaganda best. Although the two parties have to exist, so that people in America have a feeling that they have free speech. You see, if just one of them existed, you won't be able to claim that. By giving it two, it gives it an impression of free speech, an impression of power, an impression that it isn't them telling you how to think. But that Fox News study, remember that, and you saw Republicans shift. By the end of the study, the Republicans that were all watching Fox News, and all were Republicans, slanted towards, not the Republicans at the end, towards the Democrats, made to watch CNN for a month. It cuts both ways, there's no doubt about that. The point is, it's about the state superstructure in the end. This doesn't harm the state superstructure. So the Democrats and Republicans and Labour and Conservatives are all on the same side. It has to be said 1 trillion times because it's hard to, because we're propagandized, you don't see it. But without that herding into these two containers, you just had one, would see through it. Everyone would see through it. Like, there's occasional half confessions. You see it in some of those that are like called centrists. They don't say it themselves, but sometimes the right and sometimes the left say, "Oh look, Ken Clarke could be in any party." Ken Clarke says Blair could have been a Conservative, and people say Starmer could have been a Conservative, and people say Clarke could have been a Liberal Democrat. Things like that, and you got this Liberal Conservative book coming out in September. It's got contributions from Heseltine, Rory Stewart, Sam Gyimah, who's in Lib Dem, even though it says the case for the right on the front page of the book. And all contributors, and they're kind of like the British equivalent of the liberal metropolitan elite in the US, what they represent. And they really uphold the state really well. And there's some things they say that are fine, like the social liberalism, like if anyone's not committing a crime, they're free to live as they want just because they're not like you, that's not a problem, because they're black or gay or whatever. And that is like Jewish, Muslim, that's fine. But it's the state superstructure that exists already on the money things. That liberal left and liberal conservative do not want to get rid of that state superstructure to oppose the vast inequality. And thus everything they say on the social side might win over people who maybe would be centre left or centrist, but it doesn't do anything much. I mean, like another thing to say is that it's fine that they're anti-racist, but they're pro-war, and warmongers are worse than racists. So there's a massive problem there, because racists might destroy some people's lives, but warmongers threaten to destroy 1 billion lives by wiping them out. There's a quote here by Caitlin Johnston, and this fits the liberal centre-left and liberal centre-right. On the 5th of April 2022, she tweeted, "Normal person," which means normal person speaking like a rationalist, rationally, she would say herself does. And she says, "Seems like a bad idea to continually ramp up tensions between powerful nuclear-armed governments instead of working towards the Tente," which means working together. And then she says, "Crazy person," which is the crazy person's response. So what you're saying is you love dictators and want them to kill babies and commit genocide. And the point is that it's precisely the crazy person who would kill all the babies. Because World War III is impossible. Because if we have World War III, as Einstein said, World War IV would be fought with sticks and arrows and things like that. There'd be nothing worse than nuking everyone. And people who don't realise that because they're brainwashed by the propaganda would realise it at the point they saw people being radiated. It would just take as much as seeing someone they care about dying in the last seconds of life. Anyway, I think the reason why we haven't had World War III is because even some people in the state superstructure, enough of them, are sensible enough to know that that is insane. Because otherwise we would have had it over and over and over and over and over again. And I also think that the United States is probably to blame for more evil from war in the world than anywhere else on earth. It's not China. They don't do anything. I think the likes of Australia are like they're close to the US partly because of the divided personality cultural stuff like Britain is, like the shared language and everything. But they're also close to them not because they're scared of China, so they're getting protection from America, but because they're scared of the US, so better to befriend the bully. It's a bit of both. Partly it's culture, and partly it's that. So it depends if you're looking at the serious stuff or the superficial stuff. But the both reasons mix in. And the UK is similar. I get the impression sometimes that politicians like to suck up to America because it makes them feel powerful. And if they suck up to America and powerful and they get to go to the White House and they get to look at the TV cameras while there and get photographed, I think that makes them feel powerful and it makes them feel serious, even though it's very superficial. And that's similar to why all of their outlook, that's what they're doing on everything else as well, even when you keep it just to the UK. And it's definitely status and power and money and wealth and what I'll do after I've been Prime Minister and how are my legacy and all this. And you actually get more anti-American, anti-war stuff from American politicians than you do from British politicians when they're thinking about America. It's because the British politicians want to suck up, whereas the American politicians, often like the Kennedys, want to put an end to this crap. You know, there's always some who do. And you see that with Trump, who was the most anti-war president in history. I actually felt safer with him in power. not for Americans. I thought domestically he could start a bloody civil war. But for Britain, I actually felt safer because he said about 46 million times a day that he cannot stand foreign wars. So, and he hated NATO and all that. So it's a bit weird, that one. But there we go. This is all. I'm sure that was part of. He might have feared war himself, or he might have just hated all the people involved in it because they're all this liberal metropolitan elite, aren't they? All, and so, yeah, stuff like that. But whatever the reason, and you could never agree with any mainstream Western politician. And the mainstream things are NATO is very close to the EU. It's very close to the Democrats. It's very close to liberalism. It's very close to all institutional stuff that he can't stand. So, like the United Nations, NATO, it's close to the EU. It's close to the Senate. It's close to all the political class. It's close to all the political parties and democracy and stuff. So, in a way. So you can see why he might have tried to take advantage of that, but it definitely seemed to me that had he won again, America would have pulled out of NATO. And that's influenced the anti-war sentiment in the Republican Party now, because it's very much like that. But it's also the Republicans now, in general, not about Trump, I'm on about Republicans in general now, have gone to a hypocritical place whereby they slag the Democrats off for being warmongers, particularly on Russia-Ukraine, and they present themselves as anti-war and anti-foreign war, while it also seems to me that they never admit that they are pro-war with China, and I can't understand how people can think like that, because I can't do that in my head. I can't say that I'm anti something if I'm pro something. I just don't understand how other people can do it. It just feels horrible to me. It feels like not moral. It's not a morality thing or a conscious thing in me. It just doesn't feel right for me. It's a selfish thing, if anything. I just can't contradict myself like that. I don't know how they can, but they do. They say they're anti-war. They say they're anti-war and they push it like mad. And yet at the same time, they say they're pro, threatening China. I don't understand. I don't understand that. I don't understand how you can make it feel comfortable in your own mind. People always think lying is sort of like always something that immoral people do, and it's not like selfish to tell the truth, but I actually feel uncomfortable to myself lying, even if no one else gives a crap. So it's not necessarily a conscience thing. It's just like sort of like, so you don't go schizophrenic. It's a self-preservation thing to tell the truth. I don't get it. And if you said, oh well, sometimes people lie because if they didn't, then they would be punished. So it's a selfish thing. I get that, but that's not always the case. If I was for war with China, I wouldn't see any conscience thing about, you know what I mean? I wouldn't see it's a conscience thing to tell the truth, to tell a lie or truth. You know what I mean? I'm saying that sometimes it's not about conscience, it's just about your own sanity. But there's another, this video is about authenticity, and I've spotted inauthenticity with the Republicans there. Have you noticed in the States, Democrats used to be in the 30s the right-wing party, then it completely flipped. The Democrats became the left and the Republicans became the right. And now the Democrats are the pro-military industrial complex, and the Republicans are more so, with this China confusion, the anti-military industrial complex. And you see this in the UFO stuff. All the Republicans are using UFOs in order to defund the military. Like their defense contractors, how much they're spending on, how much money they're taking from us. And I also see the most radical leftists in America at the moment. Well, it's either Bernie Sanders or Alexandria Cortez. But Alexandria Cortez is joining in that because she's like an old-fashioned Democrat. And then you've got Robert F. Kennedy, who joins in as well, because he's always been an old-fashioned Democrat, harking back to his dad and his uncle all the time. And so you've got a lot of inauthenticity, because that state superstructure is just so. These radicals are just like the exception. I mean, it's like, how can I put this? Because the state superstructure is not ever going to change. So if you say, oh, what about this individual? It doesn't mean it's going to change. And I'm thinking how best to put that. What's the best way to put it? In a nutshell. And it just seems obvious that that someone like Alexandra Cortez, even though she's got 13 million followers, she's from New York, she cannot turn on the Titanic. There's no chance. Look, but whatever the UFO answer is, whatever it is, it's quite clear now that Congress has had the wool pulled over its eyes for 90 or 75 to 90 years. So let's call it the entire Second World War period, end of it. Right. So that shows the example of how strong the state superstructure is, that it can pull the wool over the eyes of the open world. There's nothing ultimately that, like, so let's say Robert F. Kennedy became president. He checks out UFOs, he checks out JFK's assassination, right? What about 5 years later when he's out? So see what I mean? It's just so springs back to normal. I mean, I think the internet changes some things. I think the internet, for example, makes the conflict that already came from news media, especially newspapers, I think it adds to that. It adds to it, and it makes it even bigger. And that conflict is within narrow margins. It's not enough to smash the state superstructure, because you can get gay marriage, you can get black people accepted, but you can't destroy the money, status, and power stuff. Hello, Bean. It's my dog. Yay. It's a really pick, unfortunately. Now, so what would authentic world look like? God. Right. So I think class politics does not mean anti-middle class or anything. Say you've got up the ladder because you've got access to uni and you become a middle class professional. Then you just don't kick the ladder down. You just keep it there so others can do the same as what you did, because you're now okay. You're fairly well off if you're professional. If you then get to that position and then you start saying, I want to kick the ladder down for a tax cut, that seems a bit crass to me. Just maintain it. It's not going to make your life bad. If we bring in education so people can climb that ladder at 4 to 16, then we give them access to college, then access to uni. So if you said that we wanted to kick the ladder down, why would that be? Or whatever, you know what I mean? It's just crazy. It's crazy talk. So that's why I say we're not anti-middle class in the slightest, and I'd expect most middle class people to agree with that. Now, authenticity is more than just that, though. When it comes to redistribution of power and income, authenticity is not going along with the propaganda arguments against doing it. Like, oh, UBI will stop people working, it will cost too much and all this. It costs too much for the poor to live. It doesn't cost too much for UBI. There's a question about AI companies. You need to windfall tax them, or need to put them into collective ownership or something, because I don't know, the top 26 people in the world have as much wealth as the bottom 3.4 billion. So I'm not going to dismiss an argument for putting AI companies into some kind of collective ownership. I mean, they could bloody fund the UK's UBI themselves, them 26 people, but they wouldn't do it because well, for obvious reasons, but even if they were had this massive conscience, they wouldn't do it because they're not all British, you know what I mean? So, but I'm just saying that the vast wealth and income now is ridiculously strong, and yet you hear I've read people say I wouldn't tax these AI companies until they made more money. Yeah, it's incredible. I mean, they're already under tax. I don't get that. So don't go along with those arguments. Just ignore them, because they're just an attempt to keep the status quo. But there is an AI revolution, and it will create vastly more inequality than we've already got between billionaires and the poor, unless you get money to the poor. You can't be against the inequality from billionaires to the poor unless you believe in getting money to the poor. Because otherwise, that inequality will just get bigger. So definitely, so there's that, and there's the education stuff. There's housing as well. That gets ignored compared to UBI and compared to the AI issue connected to the UBI. So issues, if it was all authentic, well, first of all, it would be the propaganda. It's hard to imagine. That would have to be got rid of. UBI would have some sort of UBI would have to come in. Housing would be on the table. Getting student grants back would be on the table for more working class access to uni. And it would be so much different though. It's hard to imagine. Wouldn't be able to point to power and say that's where it is, because it would be distributed. Whereas at the moment you can point to institutions. It'd be so thinly spread. Propaganda would be replaced by cooperation. It's not utopia though, because what is the thing here? The propaganda is the bollocks. The cooperation is genuine debate that isn't propagandized. It isn't just telling people how to think within narrow margins and stuff. So most, not all people that I'm similar to, most of them make a mistake. They fall for some of it. So most, not all, of the Americans are like that are on the left, fall for the Democrat-Republican debate. Not all of them do, but most do. And they sort of sound sensible, but then they fall into all the traps, which are going to keep them losers forever on both sides. They'll never ever win, whichever side they're on. So all that political circus and personality stuff and vibe, it has a place in life, but it's with pop music and pop culture, and it's not authenticity. It's not real. It's part of the propaganda matrix, and it deflects from serious issues like education, health, money, housing, UBI, technological revolution. It deflects from the because it is the propaganda. It deflects from criticism of the propaganda. Deflects from war. It deflects from it's showbiz, but it's masquerading as serious. The Democrats v Republican, Labour v Tory stuff, that's show as well. That's all just a show. That's not serious. It's like the X Factor. It deflects again. The divide and rule thing deflects, and that's the state superstructure that already exists. And then the liberal left play their game. The right play their game. I don't know. The liberal left play the game of right. We take these voters for granted. Lib Dems, Labour, Greens, blah blah blah, X about 40%. And we top them up with Tories, sort of thing. And they're the ones we don't take for granted. They're the ones we start to make love with. And the right do it by divide and rule through the press. And yet they're both what ends up with is the state superstructure being rubber stamped. So authenticity is when we stick to the working class issues about money and things very closely related to money. And also bring in war though. But if we got rid of that war machine, we'd put all that money where we want it. And therefore, because a lot of the people who think they're on my side are flirting with the system, they're not really on my side. They're accidentally not. They're being brainwashed and they're propagandized. They're in the system. We have to bring it all down. Right. That's the end of the video.